Alright, and we are back at it again with Straight On Till Morning with by Liz Braswell with your probably dyslexic reader zero. That's me. Probably dyslexic. I don't know. I say probably. Anyway, let's get on with chapter 4. Wendy makes a decision. Oh, I should reiterate chapter 3 ended with Mr. Darling telling Wendy that I'm sorry, that was loud. That was my phone. I forgot to turn my notifications off. That was just music. Turn the notifications off. Let me check this out. Mhm. 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 I'm sorry. I'm just looking at the picture. Oh well, dang, my phone is at 95%. Jesus. Okay. Anyway, Mr. Darling really didn't give Wendy a choice. Well, I guess he did. Technically, he did. He told her to really stop with the stories about Peter Pan, about Neverland, about pirates, and all the fun things in life because he wants her to be a boring housewife like his mom. Yo, his mom is a trophy wife. Her mom is a trophy wife. Holy crap. They loud too. Like, god dang. Okay. But anyway, he at the end of chapter 3, he told her that she is going to Ireland, I believe. Yep. Basically, he told her that he was going to send her off to Ireland to take care of the boys there instead, and I guess learn how to be a good housewife. And they were going to keep her notebook uh, in which she writes all of her stories and dreams down in. They get into an argument because it's not the product of a normal girl, of a happy normal girl, as he says. Wendy says that supposedly not, indicating that she is indeed not happy with him, with everything. She's not happy. No, it's all right. She get one book of a dark fantasy. She'll be okay. Anyway, this is chapter 4. Wendy makes a decision. This, at least, could be said about Snowball. The little thing curled up on Wendy's neck and breathed his soft, wet breath on her cheek while she lay on her bed, dry-eyed, and we starting off good, ain't we? Insensate, whatever this word is. Nana sat loyally on the floor nearby, perhaps withholding her disdain for the new interloper. I could say that, but I can't say the other word. In view of her mistress's distress. Ireland, Wendy finally whispered. I don't want to go to Ireland. Unless maybe I would if I got to go in an airship. Or if I went by regular ship while chasing pirates. Or if I wasn't alone. If I was brought there by Peter Pan. This time, hearing her voice aloud didn't make her braver at all. Peter Pan, she repeated bitterly. Peter Pan, who only visited when I couldn't see him. Peter Pan, who left his shadow and never came back for it. Who never came back for me. She turned her head to look out the window, but all she saw was gray. The same gray that was inside her head. The two reached out to each other like sensing light. Wendy closed her eyes, severing the connection, but it was still gray behind her closed lids. What had happened? Somehow her life had gone from heady days of playing games with Michael and John and telling stories about pirates to passing time until they came home. And then there were no more pirates anyway. Something had slipped out of her hands. There would be no pirates of any sort in her future. No fairies, no Peter Pan, no Neverland. Just banishment to another family in another drearily real country. And there, and then back home, the same social mistakes, misery in a crowd, boys who probably didn't like her anyway. She sighed and looked at Snowball. Pretty doggy, she said, giving him a pet. When they gave you to me, they were only trying to make me happy. They really do think this nannying abroad, this gothic situation, would be good for me. But I don't like gothic novels, Snowball. They're dreary. Again, try a dark romance, you won't regret it. I'm sorry. No, I'm not. I suppose it could have been worse, like an arranged marriage. Alright, perhaps that's going a bit far. It's really a bit more Charlotte than Emily. A serious introduction to a proper boy. And she carefully moved Snowball so she could give Nana a good petting too. I thought Peter Pan was the proper boy for me, but all I have is a shadow of him. She paused for a moment, wondering if that sounded too dramatic. But I really did think he was going to come back, Nana. At least to fetch his property. It's a shadow, for heaven's sake. What is he doing without it? She went to the bureau and opened the drawer and regarded the black non-object that lay there unmoving, darkening the shapes under it. He mustn't need it any more, she thought. She said thoughtfully. He mustn't want it any more. She added after another moment. Nana let out a sound somewhere between a growl and a chuff. What the heck is a chuff? You mean a huff? What the heck is that? Anyway, almost like she knew what Wendy was thinking. Wendy herself wasn't sure what she was thinking. An idea was just beginning to form in her head. An extremely alien idea, but one that opened a space in the clouds even before it was fully formed, like a sigh that precedes great things. Things that did not include Ireland. Acquiring these things would be tricky, however. Apart from maths, nothing in Wendy's life was strictly transactional. Though certainly there were times when the boys were younger that she had to divide time into 5-minute slots so each could have a turn playing with a favorite toy. And, of course, she often overheard Mr. Darling going on about how if Mrs. Darling bought a new hat, they wouldn't be able to afford a new tea service. and her mother calmly agreeing to her father's never-ending surprise, for she was practical underneath her lashes and perfume and quite good at maths. But the idea of worth, of trade, of something having value to someone else in a way that was useful to her, to Wendy, this was new and a little frightening. Here are the facts. Peter Pan didn't value his shadow anymore, apparently. But someone else might. No, scratch that. Someone else did. She wouldn't let herself think beyond this. She wouldn't let her mind chatter the way her mouth did, ruining everything. This time, she would do. She looked around until she found the perfect thing, a delicate linen and lace envelope for keeping her nightgown in that she had done a pretty job of embroidering. She carefully scooped up the shadow, folding it, and slipped it in. What else might she need? A sewing kit, a tiny lady's knife, a muffler, a half-dozen extra hairpins, some string and ribbons. I'm sorry. She put all this along with the envelope into a worn leather satchel and slipped it under her bed. Then she took out a pair of stockings and began to darn them, an innocent and useful task should anyone come upon her unexpectedly. Hours later, Michael and John returned home, full of their usual youthful energy and droll remarks. Wendy neither remonstrated them nor laughed softly. Her brothers remarked on her distracted nature. When Mrs. Darling came into the kitchen, it was with a tentative step and furtive looks. "How is your little pet?" she eventually asked. "What? Oh, he is absolutely adorable," Wendy said, remembering to toss Snowball a tidbit of mutton. For Nana, she reserved the bone. "You can take him to Ireland with you, you know. Take him with you, to Ireland. He will be a delightful little travel companion." For a moment, just a moment, Wendy looked at her mother, really looked at her, steadily and clearly. "You would never send the boys away." The statement fell hard and final and full of more meaning than anything that had ever been said in the kitchen before. "But they didn't write the fantasies," her mother said quietly. Then Mr. Darling came in, loud and blustery, talking up Irish butter and clean country air. Mother and daughter both ignored him. Wendy went to bed early that night, claiming fatigue. Since the sun had almost won its daily Sisyphean battle with the weather, the sky was light a long time before the air became heavy enough to subtly infiltrate thoughts with sleep. "Hook," she whispered, finally drowsing. "I have his shadow." Bro? Okay. Wow, so this is okay. Chapter 4 ended is pretty short. So chapter 4 is pretty short. Um Basically I do not know how this actually really works. Like, I mean, if she can just summon Captain Hook by just whispering his name, while she's going to sleep and she has his shadow. Just whispering, Hook, I have his shadow, and dude is just gonna appear? Bro, if this works, why don't she just do that with Peter Pan? Like, Peter Pan, I have your shadow. Peter Pan, I have your shadow. Repeat it 5 times like Bloody Mary. Maybe at some point he'll appear behind you and you will never know. Then again, that would be messed up. Dude appear behind her, take his shadow from her, and then slip out the window before she even realizes that he was there. Uh, that's messed up. But anyway, going on to chapter 5, Ramifications. Wendy woke as the clock told midnight. If she had any doubts about the reality of her situation or the rashness of her escape plan, this clarified it all immediately. Of course, midnight, the witching hour. A foggy memory of instructions whispered to her in dreams guided Wendy's hands through the act of slipping on her boots and lacing them up, of wrapping herself in a coat and grabbing her satchel. She tiptoed down the hall, pausing to look into Michael and John's room. They were both peacefully asleep. John's glasses hung precariously from the headboard above him, and a book was slipping out of his arms. Michael had fallen unconscious with the force of a thought, immediately and completely. No book, and he hadn't moved from that position at all. Dude did a Tiana, but he ain't gotta wake up. Goodbye, for a little while, at least, she whispered. You have your own adventures now. It's my turn this time. Despite attempting to be a ladylike sister, Wendy knew just as well as the boys where the squeaky stairs were and how to hold on to the banister and silently swing to a more polite step. Mr. Darling was snoring. The house was otherwise quiet, and she had a clear path to the back door, except for Nana, who sat resolutely in front of it. Now, Nana, Wendy whispered, if you really loved me, you would let me go. Girl, this ain't a music video. You better stop it. I'm sorry. No, I'm not. Nana made a sound of doubt in the back of her throat. Nana, I am not going to Ireland. Michael and John don't need either one of us anymore. You need a safe, warm, loving home and a good fire. I need something else. Nana's doggy eyebrows raised plaintively. She whimpered a question. Well, all right. I'll tell you, so that if anything happens to me, you may tell the authorities. I'm making my way to Neverland. Nana sighed as if to say, I wish I had never grabbed that shadow. And then she slowly stepped aside and gestured at the door with her head. Well, there it is. Go on. Thank you for understanding, Wendy said, kissing her on the head. I'm grateful. She opened the door with the smallest crack. Able to slip through the hallways, wasted away with love and longing. She whispered spitefully. Stupid John and his stupid old lady. She drifted down the walk carelessly for a moment, stunned by the night. The moon had come out, and though not dramatically full or a perfect crescent, its 3/4 were bright enough to turn the fog and dew and all that had the power to shimmer a bright silver, and everything else, the metal of the street lamps, the gates, the crack in the cobbles, a velvety black. Oh, this is bad. After a moment, Wendy recovered from the strange beauty and remembered why she was there. She padded into the street before she could rethink anything and pulled up her hood. Why didn't I do this earlier? She marveled. Sneaking out when she wasn't supposed to was its own kind of adventure, its own kind of magic. London was beautiful. It felt like she had the whole city to herself, except for a stray cat or two. Despite never venturing beyond the neighborhood much by herself, she had spent plenty of time with maps, studying them for someday adventures. And as all roads lead to Rome, so too do all major thoroughfares wind up at the Thames. Names like Vauxhall and Victoria and Horseferry sprang from her brain as clearly as if there had been signs in the sky pointing the way. Besides lost boys and pirates, Wendy had occasionally terrified her brothers with stories about Spring-Heeled Jack and the half-animal orphan children with cat-like eyes who roamed the streets at night. As the minutes wore on, she felt her initial bravery dissipate, and terror slowly creep down her neck, along with the fog, which was also somehow finding its way under her coat, chilling her to the bone. If I'm not careful, I'm liable to catch a terrible head cold. Perhaps that's really why people don't venture out in London at night, she told herself sternly, chasing away thoughts of crazed, dagger-wielding murderers with a vision of ugly red, running noses and called liver oil. And look at me with a runny nose. It's not running, but I'll keep sniffling. But it was safer to walk down the middle of the street, far from shadowed corners where villains might lurk. I'm sorry, that was a question. But was it safer to walk down the middle of the street, far from shadowed corners where villains might lurk? Building exposed out in the open meant she would be more easily seen by police or other do-gooders who would try to escort her home. My mother is sick and requires this one particular tonic that can only be obtained from the chemist across town, she practiced. A nasty I almost beatbox for y'all. I'm sorry, that was terrible. I'm still leaving it in. I'm still going to leave it in. A nasty decoction? A nasty decoction of elderberries and slippery elm, but it does such wonders for your throat. No one else has it. And do you know how hard it is to call for a cab at this time of night in this part of town? That's the crime, really. In less time than she imagined it would take, Wendy arrived at a promenade that overlooked the mighty Thames. She had never seen it from that particular angle before, or at that time of night. On either bank, windows of all the more important buildings glowed with candles or gas lamps or even electric lights behind their icy panes. Little tiny yellow auras that lifted her heart. I do wish I had done this before, she breathed. Maybe if she had, then things wouldn't have come to this. She bit her lip. A decision had been made. It was time to follow through on it. There was no room for weakness or second thoughts in the hero, and if nothing else, Wendy had to be the hero of her own soul. She found the closest set of stairs down to the river and descended lightly, keeping an eye out for thugs and cutthroats. There was no one around at all. No one visible, anyway, except for a suspicious old man in a broken top hat sucking on a pipe on the opposite bank. She stood at the edge of the turgid black waters and waited. A breeze rose, curling the tiny hairs straight from Wendy's I've heard this word be said before, but I can never say it. You know what? Screw it. I'm gonna say chin. From her chin. She realized with a start that the air now had a sharp tang of salt, of the sea. The wispy fog that had seemed to follow her from home was now joined by its big brother, which swept down the river like a swift, dark carriage. Thick tendrils proceeded, scraping this way and that just above the water, as if feeling a clear path for the billows that followed. In a very short time, Wendy was once again surrounded by gray. She couldn't even see the stairs up to the road. Everything was still. And then, emerging out of the darkness like a wraith, a single yellow light bulbed in the inky distance. Slowly and steadily it grew closer. Wendy sucked in her breath. The light resolved into a lantern hung on the yoke. No, not a yoke. A pro. That's not PRO, that's PROW. Okay? Pro. I know that much. Incredibly, unbelievably, a silent galleon glided down the Thames towards her. Its sails were furled, and its masts as thin and bare as the bones of a broken rib cage rotting on some ancient, forgotten battlefield. The ship paused improbably in the currents. Nothing moved in the foggy night but a single black flag rippling in the salty breeze. Its skull and crossbones faded and yellowed. Yeah. Wendy forced herself to stand still, waiting, as motionlessly as she could. Her heart pounded loudly in her ears. She had made her decision. She had taken an action. These were the results, and she would deal with them. Well, 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 came a voice from the deck. Then came the measured clops of surprisingly hard high-heeled boots on the planks, approaching the railing. Wendy gritted her teeth. Captain Hook leaned over and grinned at her. He I'm terribly sorry for that. He was exactly and precisely the way she had imagined, remembered him. Long, black, ridiculous, curling locks, probably a wig. I have no doubt. I have no doubt this man found a wig, say, ooh, I want this. Just like the founding fathers with the powder wigs. No doubt that this is a powdered wig. I'm sorry. No, I'm not. Long face, clear of the dissolution of rum, but ruined by the joint devils of villainy and insanity. He obviously thought himself a duke in a red and gold coat, prim breeches, and mostly spotless stockings. A feather stuck out of his oversized hat. A Jacobean collar throttled his neck. Above his smile was a mustache, waxed and styled to within an inch of its probably died life. Yet Wendy gulped. Seeing him was different from imagining, remembering him. He looked utterly absurd, but that was exactly what made him terrifying. Ah, Miss Darling, how are you this fine night? He called, saluting her with his hook, sharp and golden, the only thing that glittered in the dim light of the solitary lantern. Very well, thank you, Wendy shouted back. Manners stepped in, blessed him, when the mind scrambled away to hide. And you? Oh, I couldn't be better. Thank you for asking, he answered with an oily smile. That is, assuming you have bought what you said you would. I have it. I have Peter Pan's shadow here. She took out the satchel and showed it to him. Oh, excellent, excellent girl. Any pretense at politeness, any mockery he exhibited, disappeared entirely as physical excitement took over. The greed on his face was both reassuring and nauseating. He rubbed his hand and Hook together with tangible glee. Do we have a deal? Wendy asked, clearly and loudly. Yes, yes, of course. Passage to Neverland in return for one shadow. And home again, Wendy pressed, when I wish to return. And passage home again, Wendy, Hook said impatiently. Yes, yes. As for when you wish to return, that could be tricky business. Getting here, without pixie magic or flight, is an uncertain thing. My crew wasn't too keen on the idea to begin with. That was the deal. Neverland and home again, Wendy said, pulling the satchel away from his view and making as if to put it back on in her coat. Of course, Hook said desperately, eyes never leaving the satchel. Neverland and home again, without question. Just be aware that we are not some sort of fairy service, Miss Darling. We are pirates with limited magical means. You cannot on a whim decide you missed Mummy and Daddy long enough to expect to be transported instantly. These things take time. All right, I will take that into due consideration, Wendy said. Otherwise, promise? Oh, I promise. Swear. Swear by the pirate's code. Hook looked exasperated. Wendy put her hands on her hips. Okay, girl, sassy, stand on business. She knew about boys trying to sneak out of promises. She had two younger brothers. You had to be very specific with your orders and wishes, or they were as woolly and untrustworthy as evil genies. And what was a pirate, really, but a boy grown with a real sword and a mustache? Swear it, she repeated. She could have sworn she heard muffled laughter from behind him on the deck. Hook sighed. All right, all right. I swear on the pirate's code. I, Captain Hook, promise that in return for Peter Pan's shadow, I shall grant Wendy Darling passage to Neverland and home when circumstances allow it. All right, then, Wendy said, trying to sound surer than she felt. She had just won a battle of wits with a pirate, just like in a story. Why didn't she feel triumphant? Come on, men, let's welcome our passage aboard. Hook grinned again at her, a smile that narrowed to points at the corner of his mouth that were as sharp as those at the ends of his mustache, as the end of his hook. There was a thumping and pounding on the deck. A rope ladder unrolled over the side, bumping and bouncing on its way down, the last step landing neatly at Wendy's feet. She took a deep breath, set her jaw, and climbed up. Alright, so that was the end of chapter 5. Moving on to chapter 6, Wendy Among the Pirates. As might have been guessed from the preceding pages, Wendy hadn't much experience interacting with the world at large. That is, people who aren't her family, shopkeepers, neighbors, or other audience members at theater. Yet despite this innocence, she had an immediate sense that perhaps these pirates were not the nicest people to be left alone with. It was one thing to tell tales of swashbuckling battles and the backstory behind the bosun with the eye patch, and quite another to actually be in their midst. Captain Hook presented his men with a flourish. They stood neither in neat rows nor at attention, with very little respect at all, actually, and beheld Wendy far too boldly for her liking. One skinny chap with large gold earrings, who slouched provocatively to one side, actually gave her an appalling wink. Their clothes were not the bright primary colors of nursery room imagination. They were salt faded and dull. Their faces weren't merely unshorn and artfully streaked with a dab of tar. They were grubby. All shades of skin were dulled with not enough washing. Wendy found her hands twitching, the urge to grab a cloth and uh, scrub them almost overwhelming all other thoughts. Men, this is Wendy, darling. Wendy, this is me crew. Crew, she's a guest aboard the Jolly Roger, and I expect you swabs to treat her as such. It's bad luck to have a woman aboard. One large old pirate with a red bandana growled. Worse than a cart. Brings storms and swells. I, I think it's the best sort of luck to have a lass on deck. Deck? I said deck. A man with one eye patch and a loathsome leer grinned at her disgustingly. If any one of you touches her, Captain Hook said with a very false smile, you'll be feeling the shocks before you can draw your next breath. He leaned on his heels and put his hands on his hips, a movement that threw his splendid jacket back and revealed the twin pistols that were holstering elegantly on his hips. This made Wendy feel a lot calmer, but a little vexed. What if the pirate was saving her life, or wanted to arm wrestle? What then? This whole thing is a bloody waste of time, the third pirate scoffed. We should be out attacking ships, looting gold, and plundering treasure. And so we shall. But in the meantime, she has given me something more valuable than all the gold in Neverland, Hook said airily. Peter Pan's shadow. He unfurled the pearled, limpid thing and flapped it out to show them. A shadow hung limply from his neck where the pirate held it, struggling only a little. The pirates looked mostly unhappy at the sight, a smidgen angry, and not just a little uncomfortable. Seeing a shadow hanging there apart from its owner was unnatural, and might take the hardiest and blackest soul shiver. But even Wendy could see that there was more to it than that. And what will that get us? Demanded an angry, orange-haired lout with a northern European accent. Why, it will get us... Hook paused with a not very subtle side-eye at Wendy. Bombastic side-eye. It will get us something we've always wanted. Well, something I have always wanted, and I'm your captain, so it's what you want too. Or at least it's in your best interest to want. And when I have it, we will be done with Neverland and all its silliness forever. And there will be only plundering and loot from here on out. All right? There are muttered grumbles of grudging assent. For now, I'm putting the shadow in safekeeping with the trusted hands of Mr. Smee. At this, the pirates looked even more uncomfortable and disgusted, possibly resigned. They threw up their hands and slowly dispersed, growling and unsatisfied and muttering curses. So there you are, my dear, Captain Hook said, bowing to her. A loathsome lot, to be sure, but you're safe among them while we're on our way to Neverland. What time shall we get there, if you please? Wendy asked politely. We don't deal with time or clocks or watches on the Jolly Roger, Miss Darling. Except for figuring latitude and longitude, pirates are free from such civ- oh my god. Civilizing? Yeah, civilizing constraints and demonic inventions of man. We have none of those infernal contraptions on this ship, I could tell you. Wendy narrowed her eyes. What a strange thing to say. And there was a strange look behind his bluster. Fear? Could it possibly have been fear? He was afraid of something. Something he wasn't telling her. Alright, well, approximately how long will it take to get there? Surely pirates are entirely free from the passage of time, with what, meals and sleep and the like? Oh, you're a very clever girl, aren't you, Miss Darling? Well, these things aren't precise, but it shouldn't be more than a day or so. And how are we to get there? Captain Hook gave her a knowing smile. I suppose if you were with Peter Pan, he would say something like, "Oh, second star on the left, etc., etc., and you would fly through the sky straight to the island of your dreams." Alas, my lady, pixie dust and good magic are rather out of a pirate's reach. We had to go a different route, and it nearly cost poor Major Thomas's life, possibly his soul. It was a bit unclear. Anyway, he's a useless blubber and prone to grog. Not much of a loss there. Wendy's eyes widened. Her hand went to her mouth in dismay. But Hook was already touching his hat to her and spinning away, chuckling over the shadow he held. Now alone, she looked around the deck nervously. There were no benches or chaise lounges as on a proper transport vessel. Because of the lateness or the earliness of the hour, the pirates mostly went below decks to their bunks. None of those remaining seemed particularly happy about the strange motion of the ship, gliding along without oars or sails or any human help at all. They occupied themselves with other piratey pursuits. Five-finger fillet on an upturned barrel, superstitious sips from leather flask, shouting over a game that involved rolling with what looked very much like knuckle bones instead of dice. And how were those come by? Wendy wondered. She fidgeted with her fingers a bit, the way she did at parties, and then decided that dice throws seemed the least dangerous. Why, those are certainly unique implements you're playing with, she ventured. The pirate just grunted. Of course, I don't approve of gambling at all, but Father has a lovely pair of dice that he keeps in his jewelry. They're not bones, at least I don't think so. I believe they're ivory, although I suppose that's basically a sort of bone, isn't it? The pirates frowned and tried to ignore her. They have real pips on them, carved and painted. They really are quite lovely. Of course, I am against gambling, and so is Mother. It's not a proper occupation for anyone, even men. But his dice are quite pretty and nice to hold, and they warm up in your hands so. And how do you know which side yours lands on, without pips? The pirates stopped their game entirely and stared up at her in exasperation. Well, I've never played before, she said a little defensively. I'm not asking you to teach me, I'm just wondering. I should have said no if you asked me, wouldn't I? Seeing as gambling and games are of chance or immoral, so please, I'd rather you didn't ask. Won't go on to, one of the pirates grumbled, and with that he swept the dice into his bag and left her alone with the other players, who gave her nasty looks before they too retreated. Wendy wilted. Life aboard the pirate ship was actually surprisingly similar to a fancy party, the type she hated, with dressed-up girls and boys and men and women and tea and tiny sandwiches and aspic and someone showing off on the piano. I got a burp, excuse me. That was just air. No one wanted to talk to her at those gatherings either. It was like Christmas all over again. Girl, wait a minute. Christmas? Don't nobody want to talk to you on Christmas? Don't nobody want to go up to you and say, hey, Merry Christmas. I hope you get what you deserve. Actually, no, never mind. You hear a black woman say that, you probably want to leave. You probably want to leave. She wandered forlornly across the deck and looked out over the railing. The sky was blank. Fog surrounded the ship, and there was no more breeze. It was as if they had reached the middle of the night, the middle of nowhere. Everything stood still, except for a few tendrils of Wendy's hair and the black flag. She shivered, pulling her coat more closely around her. She didn't want to be alone, but the five-finger fillet players looked dangerous. And then Wendy saw salvation. A lone pirate was sitting cross-legged on the deck, looking squint-eyed and studious, pulling at a string on his pants. He was sewing. Wendy brightened like the sun. Now there was a subject she could feel confident in. She walked up to the fellow and watched for a moment as he I'm sorry, I'm getting sleepy. Excuse me. And effectually stabbed a giant needle into a piece of cloth that he held awkwardly in place on his pants, trying to cover a hole. Excuse me, if you don't mind me saying, but I'm afraid you're doing that entirely wrong, Wendy said politely. The pirate looked up at her, one eye still squinted. She wondered if it was a permanent affliction. Well, I ain't got miss. It's just to fix up my fancy pants, not do I? He cackled. What mother can't do, sons must makes do, as they say. Ah, I don't know about that, Wendy said, trying to work the words out in her head and failing. But if you'll hand it to me, I'll have a go. The pirate's eyes widened. Without a second thought, he shoved the whole mess over to her, including his pants, which, as his brightly striped knickers attested, he had apparently not been wearing. Oh! Wendy blushed and turned around. The pirate cackled again. What? You think I'll stick it with a needle while it's on me skin? On me own skin? I'm unskilled, not daft, you silly coot. Now settle down. You ain't seen me privates, nor me bum. And there's them that was less on washing day around here, so you best get used to it. Well, Wendy tried to rearrange her shocked expression while busying herself sorting through the mess of cloth. He was right, of course. She was in alien country now, a ship full of uncivilized men. All she could do was act properly, like a decent, civilized person, as there was no guarantee that others would. That should be the complete opposite of what you should be acting like right now. They want to act uncivilized? Baby girl, you gotta match energy. She settled herself down on a tipped over quarter cast and smoothed out the pieces. Actually, The pirate had made a very nice, neat little knot to begin with, but that made sense, she supposed. Sailors had to be very good at knots, hadn't they? She bet they would be excellent in mac- macrame or even crochet, if patiently taught. Wendy whistled and hummed to herself and felt much better with something familiar in her hands. In a short while, the patch was finished and held tightly on by tiny and neat little stitches. There, all done. You can see how I. Oh! There was a crowd around her, pirates, speechless and wide-eyed to a man. Blimey! Do my next! One said, whipping off his shirt. No, me! I got no seal on me trousers, another begged. No, me next, whined a third. All right now. She put her hands on her hips, feeling crowded and overwhelmed. It was on the tip of her tongue to say that as long as she was on board, she would do any minor repairs and mending that were needed. Might as well make herself useful, right? That was what she always did, made herself useful, and as a result, she was always needed and liked. Then again, she had paid her passage on this vessel, a very dear one. She wasn't a scullery maid, she was a customer. My jacket's fearful cold when the wind blows. I'll give ye a halfpenny if ye do it first. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought that was Wendy talking. My jacket's fearful cold when the wind blows. I'll give ye a halfpenny if ye do it first. A fourth pirate said shyly, seeing her hesitate. The others caught on fast. I'll give ye me grong ration for me pants. I'll give ye a whalebone needle and carve ye a thimble if ye like. Can make ye things too, like a muffler for cold days. Well, that's better, Wendy decided, I think. Pirates were very transactional and seemed to respect you more if you were as well. In some ways, it was rather a windfall. Who knew what other supplies she would require on her foray into Neverland? In her dreams and stories, there was always just the right shaped stick or rock or key discovered at the last possible moment. But was the real Neverland like that? And of course, the pirates would have to talk to her now. Take that, shebos, thought Wendy, very pleased with herself. There was no sun to mark the passage of time. After her third mending project, Wendy began to go restless. She asked the hovering pirates the precise old clock, but they all shook their heads. Well, that's the sun. You can't see no sundial, one said, pointing to the dark grey wall of fog around the ship. And Hug don't allow no modern clocks. No watches nowhere on account of the crocodile what took his hand. It talks like a clock it swallowed. Aha! Now it made sense. She had called the creature Tick-Tock in her own telling of the story. Hook's hand had been given to the beast. Hook's hand had given the beast a craving for more of the pirate captain, and it followed the Jolly Roger everywhere. The noise of a clock it had swallowed always precedes its appearance. The boys would shriek, with glee when Wendy said things like, "But wait, what's that? Off in the distance. Tick tock, tick tock. It's a crocodile!" Young Michael would cry. Our thing hasn't been around for years, another pirate said. Probably dead from indigestion. But Hook, he still thinks it's out there, somewhere. He can't bear being reminded of it. He thinks the beast is still after him, said a third. Every time he hears a clock, it drives him batty. She wondered what had happened to the crocodile in the real Neverland. She hadn't killed it off in her own city, so it was filled with her or polite. whose waist he had fixed, off bowl since he had done. She discreetly tried to watch. She pirate with the two big gold earrings saw this and cackled. Have you anything for your own would you like fixed? Have have you anything of your own you would like fixed? Wendy asked him, trying to change the subject and distract attention from her covert actions. Oh, I'm plenty handled with a needle and thread, the pirate said, posing for her. And in fact, he was more solidly dressed than the rest. Everything was mostly clean, if not perfect, and unpatched. I just don't let it get out too much. Know what I mean? I suppose I do, Wendy said uncertainly as the pirate winked at her. The name's Zane, he said with a bow. Alodon Zane, at your service. Wendy, darling, at yours, she said with a curtsy. Miss, darling, what are you doing in here with these lots? Captain Hook was suddenly filling the door like a bad omen and roaring like an enraged lion. At her dismay and the other pirate's shock, he immediately softened his voice. My dear, you're a guest, not a midshipman. Come dine in my quarters. Mr. Smee will serve us. Wendy shivered. She might have read a few books that were not strictly approved by father or prescreened by the bookseller. In those typist pages, she had glimpses of the greater world, even if she didn't fully understand it. She knew it was not proper to be alone in the company of a strange man. Don't worry, Zane whispered into her left ear. He's not. I mean, Hook's a lunatic, but he loves decorum. Your maidenhood is safe with him. Out your throat, maybe, but the rest of you is. Thank you, Wendy whispered back. Then she returned the bowl to the pirate who had provided it. Thank you, sir, but I suppose I will be dining on the Lido deck instead. Your generosity is very much appreciated. Oh, yes, me too. Absolutely, ma'am. The pirate blushed. The pirate bluttered, bowing. Lunch with a pirate captain could have been many things. Terrifying, spooky, embattled, even romantic. Dark romance. Given the right circumstances, dark romance. But in reality, lunch was awkward. Reality. Wendy sat up properly and used her best manners. Captain Hook bowed and flourished and removed his hat and pulled out a chair for her. The table was a tiny folding-out spread with a fancy cloth, silver utensils, and and a clever golden canla can candelabrum, I guess. I think that's how you say it. That was held upright on chains so it didn't tip with the waves. It was all very lovely, and for the first moment Wendy was overcome with the precise perfection of the scene. There was even a spinet piano in the corner of the room. I do play, if you're wondering, Hook said, following her eyes. A bit harder since Hook, but I'll make do. They settled down to empty plates. Mr. Smee, Hook called politely. No one came. Mr. Smee, he said again with a growl, while still smiling at Wendy. Silence. I'm not about to yell because it is midnight. No, not. It's 1 o'clock in the morning for me. Mr. Smee! The captain finally cried, slamming his hook down on the table. Blast that man! He'll be at the grog again, no doubt. He leapt up and crashed to the door, muttering under his breath. Confounded, lazy, overpaid. Wendy sat stiffly and continued to look around at everything she had already looked at. Eventually, Hook came back, awkwardly carrying a plate of carved beef, a bowl of neeps and tatties, and a beautiful, if stale-looking big all cradled in his hand and Hook. Wendy leapt up to help, but he tisked her back down, and actually quite neatly and daftly laid out the feast. Good help, so hard to get, he said apologetically. I should have had him walk the plank years ago, but we go way back. He even saved my life a few times. It's like keeping an old dry cow around because you can't bear the look in her eyes. Aye, Wendy said uncertainly. They concentrated on serving themselves in silence. Wendy wondered if this was what having a distant uncle was like. An odd grown-up who didn't know how to interact properly with young people and who often said inappropriate things. So I'm curious, Miss Darling, Hook finally began, with a casual tone so false Wendy's ears practically curled at his words. Whatever made you come to the rather rash decision to trade Peter Pan's shadow to his greatest enemy in exchange for passage to Neverland? Wendy was about to interrupt and point out that Hook wasn't Peter Pan's greatest enemy, depending on how you look at it. Peter Pan's greatest enemy could have been growing up, his own sense of self-importance, or his more immediate dangerous foes, the warlike winged licht, the fang riders of Upper Hillside, or the Cyclops of the Cerulean Sea. Hook was a reoccurring enemy, not his greatest enemy. Then she thought better of mentioning it. Well, you know, he never came back for it. He just left it there, she said airily, trying to ignore the agency she had in the decision. That what she had done wasn't right. That these words were false. What was I supposed to do? Keep it around for the rest of my life among my trinkets and bric-a-brac, hanging after me? You seem to want it more than he, and I wanted a little holiday. Everyone is happy. Shall I pour you some water, Captain? Thank you, my dear, but I'll stick with this lovely Barolo. A very interesting argument. Justification, maybe? Now don't look at me like that. It's just us, Miss Darling. But surely you, of all people, know that Neverland is a bit trickier than that. There is no holidaying there, like Blackpool or the south of France. You have made quite the commitment. I can't help but wonder what drove such a pretty, innocent little thing like you to such desperation, abandoning her life and family to leap into the unknown, trading in her hero's shadow in the process. Wendy had mixed feelings at these words. On the one hand, they made her sound a little epic. I feel it myself. On the other hand, was her life really that dire? Her family loved her. Nana loved her. Ireland was terrible, but it was for only a short period of time, right? And safe. She looked up at the pirate, suspicious. In her stories, Captain Hook was always planning, always conniving. He had an angle on everything, even if that angle was stupid and resulted in ridiculous defeats. So what was he driving at now? Yes, it shall make a fascinating chapter in my memoirs, won't it? She said as hotly as she could, pouring herself another glass of tar-scented water. Would your family miss you? The Mr. and Mrs. Darling? I don't know how time operates between Neverland and the real world. Perhaps I'll just have been gone a day, she answered carelessly. The fact that I'm getting sleepy by my own reading. She answered carelessly. Perhaps it will be a blink of an eye. Perhaps this is all now a dream, and I will wake when it's over, back in my bed. Either way, Mother and Father have their hands quite full with Michael and John. I dare say they shan't miss me beyond needing to write an embarrassing explanation to a certain family in Ireland. I just hope Nana remembers to feed Snowball. But what about you, Captain Hook? What exactly are your plans for Peter's shadow? Are you going to keep it and hold it over his head forever in return for your Hook? Forever? Hook sat back in his chair, looking astonished. Oh, no, no, my girl. I have no desire to continue this endless charade with Peter Pan any longer at all. I have wasted far too much of my life on it. My crew hasn't looted a merchant vessel or stormed a port in years. No, I am done with Neverland. Rather permanently. I think it's high time I put it and Peter behind me. Rather permanently. That sounds a bit ominous, Wendy observed. It was supposed to. I'm actually quite thrilled by the fact that you would be here as an audience to his and its fate. What precisely are you going to do, if I may ask? Well, my dear, unlike the villains in your quaint little tales, I'm not daft enough to reveal my cunning plans to anyone, a hero or even a bystander like yourself, before carrying them out. Wendy took an umbrage at the term bystander. Wasn't she on a pirate ship headed to Neverland of her own volition? Didn't she invent much of the world he inhabited? But there were more pressing issues than her own ego. Of course not, she agreed. Around a sip of water so she wouldn't choke on her own subterfuge. But surely you couldn't keep such ideas entirely to yourself. Even a great captain like yourself needs help with dirty work. And perhaps a sympathetic ear. Well, you're right there, of course, Hook said, twirling his deep red wine in his glass. But I have Mr. Smee, who holds all my secrets dearly. He alone is aware of the not-so-happily ever after that awaits all of Neverland. And I'll have you know, Miss Darling, I was rather despairing of ever being able to carry out all the details needed for my plan. Your offer of Peter's shadow came like a miracle out of the blue. Finally, Mr. Smee and I can get to work on it. Wendy was, however inadvertently, responsible for setting in motion one of Hook's most murderous schemes that involved all of Neverland. Rather permanently? She swallowed and tried to stay calm. Lucky break for you, I guessed. Lucky break for you, I suppose, she said casually. But how does it involve Peter's shadow? You could have made all these plans without knowing for certain you could get it, and tut tut, the captain said, shaking her finger at her like a schoolmarm. It's highly impolite to question our pirate captain so closely when he has invited you to lunch, don't you know? Terrible bad form. And Wendy grounded her teeth, defeated. The moment lunch, or whatever it was, the, the world was still gray and formless, ended. She escaped back to the deck. Her eyes had that dry, crusty feeling of having been open too long from being up too late. How long had it been since she had left the house? It was mad not having clocks or watches around. Despite just eating a rather substantial meal, she felt a little lightheaded, but not queasy. Even with the rhythmic rocking of the ship, she walked steadily, and her stomach remained firmly digesting the surprisingly good repast. "Lady, Missy, Miss Darling!" A pirate ran up to her, a loop of string in his hands. Two other pirates came reluctantly behind, looking sharding. One of them cradled a badly bleeding hand. "My goodness, whatever happened here?" "Me and these dolls were just arguing about the proper play of cat's cradle," the pirate said with the string. The pirate with the string said. "The white duke here kept flubbing it up." "I had to cut him," the second pirate admitted, pointing at the wound on the third's hand. "Can you show us how to do it proper like?" the duke said. The duke asked heedlessly of his injury. Wendy gave them all a severe look. "Let me take care of this poor fellow first, and then see what we can do." She took the pirate's bloody hand and gently peeled open his fingers for a better look. It wasn't so bad, really just deep and narrow. All it needed was to be thoroughly cleaned before infection set in. For this they needed some pure rum and one of Wendy's precious handkerchiefs. The pirate tried not to swear during her judicious application of the stinging cleanser. Only then did she take the loop of string and excuse me. Only then did she take the loop of string and demonstrate the proper sequence of cat's cradle. She even included some of the more difficult variations like the clock tower and the bishop's cap. Delighted, the pirates clapped her on the back rather harder than she would have liked and strode off, golfing and chatting like there had never been a row to begin with. Wendy sighed and shook her head. If all of Neverland's adventures were as easily won as that, she was in for a nice time indeed. She leaned on the gunwale and looked out. Was it getting lighter? Really? This time? Yes. The rosy fingers of dawn had finally slipped through the fog and gently pulled it apart, separating the tendrils weakening it. Wendy watched in fascination. She almost never saw the sunrise except in winter, and that was through her excuse me. Oh my god. Oh, I'm so sorry. She almost never saw the sunrise except. What the heck was that? Okay, never mind then. Let's start over. She almost never saw the sunrise except in winter, and that was through her window, under the grey sprawl of London town. Nothing like this. As the sea lightened and the sky began to clear, the two elements resolved themselves into colors unlike anything she was used to. Brilliant emerald and deep aquamarine. Pellucid azure and shining lapis. It was so storybook perfect. She wouldn't have been surprised at all if the sun came out with a great smiley face drawn on it. "Miss Darling," came a whisper behind her. Wendy spun around. A cadaverously skinny pirate stood there, the one who had leaded her so loathsomely before. Loathsomely. There we go. Oh, excuse me. Oh. His one eye was narrowed and lecherous, his smile thin and frightening. "I don't believe we properly met. How do you do?" Wendy said, putting out her hand. "Oh, I do just fine," the pirate growled, and pushed her back up against the railing. Wendy was caught before she could even figure out what was happening. It took her a moment to find her voice, and one more to realize that, despite struggling, she had no ability to fend off this attacker. "Unhand me!" she cried. The pirate laughed, his foul-smelling breath nearly as I don't know this word. I've heard of it before. I've heard it, but I can't. I'm sorry. Wendy screamed. The pirate leaned over her. A shot rang out. So loudly, so close, she felt his hot wind singe her face. Her attacker looked surprised, and then slumped to the deck. A pool of blood formed under his head, as his body crumbled into a more permanent position. She saw the perfect hole behind his ear where the bullet had gone. Wendy knew from the stories that this was the time when women screamed and screamed and screamed, and sometimes men too. But she was just happy to be able to breathe freely again and to have that monster off of her. She felt little of anything except relief. Hook stood on the deck, posed either heroically or demonically, depending on how you read the scene. He had his pistol out and aimed in case the foul miscreant rose again, and a curious golden two-cigar holder balanced in his hook. The smoke rose from both cigars as well as the muzzle of his gun. The rest of the crew appeared as silently as rats, and just as curious, from all parts of the ships, including the crow's nest. "Miss Darling, are you hurt?" Captain Hook asked, his tone soft and flat. "No, I don't. I'm a little." She touched her mouth and throat, wiping away the grease from the dead man's fingers. Then she began to shake. "I'm physically, I'm all fine." "Mr. Smee, have the crew remove this filth at once," Hook said with a curl of his lip, the gun and cigars held steadily. "And someone bring Miss Darling a draught of something to restore her spirits." "Oh, I don't," Wendy began. But then again, maybe a drop of something might not be such a bad idea. The shaking had spread to her feet and parts of her body untouched by the villain, and she was having a hard time reading in the ants she felt crawling on her skin. 3 pirates came forward, none of them named Mr. Smee. Wendy was fairly certain and unceremoniously dumped the body overboard. The 4th brought a mop and dully began scrubbing the blood and brains away. 2 more rushed to her side, one holding a silver and crystal decanter, and the other a matching cup, both of which looked like they were from Captain Hook's personal stash. Someone held her upright, and someone else poured a few drops of liquid, thick and amber, into the glass. She downed it in one gulp, feeling all eyes on her. It burned just as she imagined it would. Her eyes felt like they were spinning in her sockets. Bucking Barking important, Captain, she heard someone say as she staggered a bit, still trying to collect herself. But we're barking our purposes now, Captain. And of course, for Neverland. Thank you. But right now we have more serious things to clear up here. Hook growled. He looked over the crew, into each and every man's eyes. The muzzle of his gun followed closely. This is how you treat her? He demanded, his voice carrying across the deck, although he didn't shout. I bring you someone to be your mother, and this is how you treat her? Oh, Wendy said, apologies coming to her lips far too easily. The deadly niceties of social convention, the stupidity of being raised by the darlings. Or maybe it was just a drink. Most of them were gentlemen. They didn't at all treat me badly. It was just that one fella, and oh, I'm sorry, what? She blinked at his words, caught up in her brain. Captain Hook put his arm protectively around her shoulders, careful not to burn her with the cigars. He addressed the man with a tone of great disappointment. I bring you a lady and a gentlewoman to take care of all of you, and this is what you do? We would never, one pirate called out piteously. Valentine is a villain. Everyone knows it. He's the worst, another called out. We was lost to her. I gave her me on board for lunch. She fixed my pants up real good. I never harm a hair on her head. Well, you almost let this happen, Hook roared, firing his pistol in the air. Wendy winced at the repetition of the loud sound, the ringing in her ears, but it didn't stop her from speaking. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I don't believe I quite understand what you're saying, she pressed. I'm glad to have helped out here and there while aboard, but as someone just said, we're not far from Neverland now. My journey aboard your lovely ship is nearly over. It will soon be time to disembark. I'm not here to be a mother to anyone. I'm here to have adventures. And adventures you shall have, Hook promised. After we leave these cursed waters of Neverland, we shall travel the high seas, plundering and looting along the way, and you shall fix our pans, do our laundry, mend our wounds, and generally take care of us. And probably do much better job than Mr. Smee. I shall do nothing of the sort, Wendy protested, almost stamping her foot. We had a deal. I bought passage to Neverland for Peter's shadow. Yes, and here we are, almost arrived. Captain Hook said this politely, but a nasty grin stretched across his face. He indicated the horizon with his gun. Far off in the distance was indeed a pale, bright line, a glowing golden beach. That was what you bargained for, and that was all you bargained for. I never promised to put you ashore. Dun, dun, dun. So, to the folks who may listen to this, who may not listen to this, what did we learn from being in Wendy's shoes? When you make a deal with a pirate, you have to treat it like a wish from a genie. You have to be more specific than when you are talking to a boy. She paid for passage to Neverland, but she never said she wanted to go on to Neverland. She just wanted to get there. He got her there, and I could probably promise he's not going to let her go all that easy. But anyway, that is it for tonight. It is almost 1:30 for me here. I'm going to bookmark this with my god dang it, Slytherin bookmark, magnetic bookmark. Close the book. And that is all for tonight. If you liked and you are watching this on YouTube, please leave a like, comment if you are enjoying this. You can comment on my sniffling. I do not care. I make fun of my own self. So, ha. Also, if there are any technical difficulties, please do let me know because I do not know myself. I am not going to be going back through this and listening to it. So, if you guys could please let me know, let me know of any technical difficulties. I am holding the mic now because I heard from last time that not not that anyone told me, but I heard while going back through it that my voice sounded very far away. So I have to hold it up close to me while I'm reading and doing all that sort of stuff. So I can't hold the book and give you guys that ASMR. You know what? Here. There you go. Alright, if you're using this to go to sleep, good night and sweet dreams. Just don't dream of Neverland, and if you do not dream of a tall man's, well, he ain't tall, he's wearing boots that have high heels in them, with a hook for a hand, a black powdered wig, more than likely, ain't no doubt. But anyway, thank you all for watching, thank you all for tuning in. If any of you asked if anybody joined the stream, no.